Hello, welcome again to Sport Unlocked, going through all the week's sports news with me, Rob Harris from Sky News, Martyn Ziegler from The Times, and Tariq Panja from The New York Times. I feel so often we start with perhaps legitimate scrutiny of FIFA, questioning some of their actions, that let's start on something positive, which is actually the new website where you can see all the football clubs where they're subject to transfer bans. You can click and go through all the countries, you can search the database, and it's all there in an open way. A bit of transparency, just the type we always call for.
Well, congratulations for transparency there. Any interesting clubs under transfer embargoes?
I did briefly look at the list, although fortunately our good friend Graham Dunbar from AP has logged it all. He's found 6 Saudi Arabian clubs, 5 in Argentina's top flight, leading African teams, so pretty heavy. He's pointing out, several who've reached the Club World Cup in recent years. So these aren't just small teams.
Saudi Arabia, notorious for being on that list before it was published. Everyone knew it was an open secret. There'll be a bunch of Saudi teams. The ones that caught my eye, you mentioned the African teams: Wydad Casablanca of Morocco and TP Mazembe of Congo. Big teams, regional champions often. So that was a shame. Just on the broader point you were making at the start, is it really that impressive that they're publishing this? Shouldn't they be doing it anyway? I mean, it's not for us. They're a service provider for the football industry. If I'm a club going through the transfer market, FIFA is in charge of the international transfer market. This stuff should be public. It's a service provider, and they've provided a service. Well done, FIFA, for doing your job. Great, more to come, I hope.
Yeah, for instance, they don't publish every single person, player, entity sanctioned in the game for any reason. There's no open database of that.
Yeah, there probably should be for that. I think that, for example, the Football Association, I think, effectively does that. Certainly for the anything which has written reasons. So it's a sort of fairly significant offence. That's on the Football Association's website.
In the past, so up until this summer, actually, the way clubs would find out who's on a transfer embargo is when they try and enter details in the transfer matching system, which is that system where international trades have to go through. That is held by FIFA. So I guess they would have known through there. But yeah, great. It's public.
And quite public this week, another award for Gianni Infantino. Celebrations at FIFA.
Yeah, he got something in Dubai, didn't he? A award for his contribution to global sport.
Let's give it the full title: International Sports Personality.
There we are. And he was there, I think, in Dubai for the FIFA Beach World Cup. And
that's coming up in February. So it was previewing that, and the award's actually from Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum, the ruler of Dubai.
Wow. Yeah. And look, we're in the UK as we're recording this. No stranger to the UK court system, of course. Sheikh Maktoum. It was his very high-profile divorce from Princess Haya, sister of the ruler of Jordan, that played out in the Royal Courts of Justice, and some horrific details there. And also a big owner of horses in the industry here, Rob.
Yeah, the Godolphin stables.
Yeah, he was a very sort of familiar figure at British horse racing tracks, Royal Ascot. He would previously shared a carriage with the Queen. However, since the divorce trial, which came up with some very, very embarrassing stuff, things that he'd done, effectively organised the kidnap of one of his daughters from the UK, and that he had bugged the phones of his wife and their lawyer. He was basically, the royal family realised it would be too embarrassing to be seen with him, and I don't think he's been to since that happened. I don't think he's been to a British horse racing event.
No. The other thing that was interesting was how we got this information. I don't know about you. My email inbox was from a company called APO. That's how I got it. It was a release from this company that I looked at a lot of my releases. There are awards given to Fatma Samora when she was General Secretary of FIFA. This company APO is basically an African based public relations company that seems to be sending out positive news on behalf of FIFA. And they were also involved in some of the testimonies from players supporting the biannual World Cup back in the day. So yeah, handy for FIFA to have these guys on hand.
Interesting you talk about that, and we discuss the communications industry and FIFA's role quite often. And you're saying about how FIFA used that company there to distribute its information. One of the big things from FIFA is making football truly global. That's Infantino's big mission. And I have often pointed out there is a way of fulfilling that through the communications means. They've got this money, they've got all this vast FIFA wealth to put into things like sending out press releases. And why not be supporting some of these FAs around the world, particularly now we're at the time of the African Cup of Nations and the Asian Cup, to help them get the coverage for their teams, their players, to connect perhaps outside the regions, because there isn't as much coverage globally as they say as the build up to a Euros, for instance. And that seems to be how you could actually substantially use your status, use your wealth to actually make football global. So some of the talking points are more about conversations with those players, help to connect those FAs that don't perhaps have the comms resource.
Yeah, lots of small football associations, different parts of the world. The resources are very, very stretched. So, yeah, this FIFA can help promote their messages. I'm sure it's a good idea.
The African Cup of Nations starting this weekend and will run for the next few weeks. Almost tragedy at the start. There was a horrible story about the Gambian team. I don't know if you guys followed that at all. They took off on a plane supplied by the host, the Ivory Coast, and plane had to turn around after 9 minutes. The cabin pressure changed to a dangerous level. The coach, when it came back, said players had fainted and couldn't be woken up, and it was only the pilot's alertness that stopped what could have been a major tragedy. So, yeah, that sounded terrifying. Hopefully, that's the last kind of horror story ahead of the tournament, which didn't end well last time in Cameroon when we had that stampede. So here's wishing them all the best for a better tournament.
That crush that took place during the tournament last time, and this time obviously being staged in Ivory Coast, the Asian Cup being in Qatar, which means a return to some of those World Cup stadiums, including Lusail. So it'd be interesting to see, whereas Qatar a year or so on, is there a big influx of fans from across Asia? Do they pack into the stadiums locally? What sort of interest? Qatar won the last tournament. They are reigning Asian champions.
It's good that the stadiums don't become white elephants, isn't it, for sure? It'd be interesting to see, though, in 5 years' time, whether what the use of these stadiums that were built for tournament is, because you can see immediately after the World Cup, they're going to put them to some use, but I think it's the long term that's the greater challenge.
And look, they're enormous, these stadiums. A lot of them are humongous for a country Qatar size. I was at the Asian Cup last time. I think it was United Arab Emirates, and it was in the middle of the blockade. That's why Qatar's victory was quite significant. That was the diplomatic attack on Qatar that was led by Saudi Arabia, UAE, and Egypt, etc. And it was quite a tournament. There was the Qatar team were pelted with shoes and sandals, I think, in the semi-final when they beat the UAE, if I remember correctly. But in terms of fan bases and people travelling, Rob, you asked that question. I don't think there will be a lot of people. There weren't then. There aren't going to be this time. But there is interesting teams there. India are playing, for example, Vietnam, Thailand, China, who've had a disastrous few years on and off the pitch. Recently lost to Hong Kong for the first time since the British handover. So they'll be interesting to watch. And Chinese football was in the news this week. Li Tia, the former coach, the former FA president as well, they were paraded on TV to acknowledge that they had paid bribes and received bribes in order to corrupt Chinese football. So back to square one over there, it seems.
Yeah, obviously a tournament taking place against the backdrop of a different form of regional instability. This time we've got Palestine playing there. One of their Olympic football coaches was killed in the Israeli strikes last weekend. So that's the tournament taking place with that going on in the region too. And then obviously with Saudi Arabia being the focus of so much of football in the Gulf, it's a bit of Qatari attention back again. But at the same time, with so many questions over the Saudi football project.
Jordan Henderson has probably caused a lot of these questions, hasn't he? Because it sort of became apparent at the weekend that only a few months into his Saudi Arabian foray, he wants out. He's playing in front of tiny crowds. The heat, when he started, the heat was pretty bad, and he's basically just not enjoying it and realised there's more to life than huge amounts of money.
It's a disaster, isn't it? Calamitous. His reputation was absolutely shredded. At the time he signed, there was a lot written, a lot said, because he was such a big advocate of the LGBT community. There was the launch of Henderson on social media by his club in grayscale. So those rainbow armbands he wore as the Liverpool captain were not displayed in the way they would normally be. And now, just a few months on, Martyn, you're saying he wants out. But due diligence might have been. The idea that Saudi Arabia is hot shouldn't surprise anyone, should it?
Well, no. I don't think the heat was perhaps he probably thought, well, actually going to be playing during the Saudi cooler months most of the time, and it wouldn't be too bad. But still, I think it's not the heat. I think it's so much as it's the lifestyle. I think you go from playing in the Premier League in England, and it's very, very difficult playing in front of. I mean, we're talking about literally crowds of less than 1,000 people. The standard's pretty low. And then I'm sure you question yourself, why am I even doing this? I think it's quite a big setback for the Saudi Pro League generally. That perhaps their most high profile, they're definitely their most high profile English player, basically wants to turn his back on it. That if they're talking about bringing in other players, which they are, expanding their overseas base, then that's not going to help them at all.
I suppose if they manage to counter it with another signing, they can portray it as actually we're getting younger players in and we're moving away from the sort of veterans and the players in their 30s joining. It's all about how they characterise it, what else is announced around the same time. And I suppose for Henderson, I don't think it will hang over him for that long. More if he's trying to sort of talk about social causes, I think it's where it would sort of come into sort of issue. But, if he just gets back playing again somewhere in Europe, I don't know, I think a part of our industry can move on fairly quickly, can't it?
Yeah, perhaps, but we won't be forgotten what happened. If he comes back as a big advocate, I doubt he'll come back as a major advocate in the same way he was before, because it'll be very strange. I mean, it'll be interesting to see if he does. And I was just thinking, I wonder if there's any players, English players, who were hoping for a payday in Saudi Arabia in the future, who are thinking, God, this guy might ruin my chances. He's like salted the ground for them because the Saudis will be thinking, God, these English guys, they're not worth the trouble, perhaps, if Henderson goes, and they'll look elsewhere. The world is their oyster.
I suppose one of the issues is the only words we hear from him is him being on the defensive about trying to justify why he's gone. Maybe because there was no mass media sort of engagement right at the start of his time in Saudi, which sort of attempted to deal with that for anyone who wanted to ask questions. So he sort of kept on coming back to it in various interviews and then sort of going silent. So not a sort of sustained public profile in terms of even just talking normally about football. It's almost like you're sort of in the shadows, a bit like how, Cristiano Ronaldo has been there for a year, and I can't think of anything substantial he's done media-wise, which means it's sort of hanging over him in that sense. Although, he's mixing very much with the elite end of the Saudi state very often too.
Yeah, I mean, it just seems like an influencer, I suppose. If it seems that's part of their project, so they might be getting what they want from him. They don't really want him to be doing, I don't know, major in-depth interviews. Maybe he hasn't got that much to say, but he's very visible there, and with Saudi people in Saudi places, celebrating the national day, attending the big boxing bouts in the front row with people like Turkey Al-Sheikh, the head of entertainment over there. I think they feel they're getting their bang for the buck from someone like Ronaldo. And let's be honest, Jordan Henderson, 33-year-old, decent-ish midfielder, is, just one of many players there. The negativity around Henderson is probably something they wouldn't mind seeing the back of, probably.
Hang on a minute. 3 months ago, he was saying very excited about the announcement that Saudi Arabia is bidding to host the 2034 World Cup. Go Saudi Arabia, he said.
Who was that, Henderson?
Yeah.
Global ambassador. Now, once he gets out, he can travel the world. He doesn't have to live there and earn his corn that way.
Will he still be supporting that bid? That would be a big question. The transfer window, obviously, with a few weeks to go still, and see which players actually do head out to Saudi or end up returning to Europe.
Yeah, it'll be an interesting one.
Well, this has been a week where 2 World Cup winning coaches and managers have died. The first 2 people to win it, both as a player and a coach. We had Mario Zagolla, the Brazilian, and then Germany's Franz Beckenbauer, both dying within the space of a few days. So many sort of tributes to what they achieved on the pitch and off the pitch in the dugout too. Some initial thoughts, obviously, why perhaps we focus more on one person dying over another. Franz Beckenbauer obviously getting a lot more global coverage, I would sense, than Zagallo, who actually won 4 World Cups, 2 as a player, 1 as assistant coach, 1 as head coach. Franz Beckenbauer winning 1 as a player, 74, and 1 as head coach of West Germany in 1990.
I was thinking about this, Rob, when you asked us to think about this before we started the pod. And there's a few reasons. One is, for me, the times they played in and the media landscape. Zagallo, generation older than Franz Beckenbauer, and he wasn't the superstar of that team. That Pele kind of was the gold standard player with Brazil, and again, it was in black and white. Beckenbauer emerges as a supreme player, color TV in the 70s, and he's in Europe and he speaks English. Someone I spoke to, a Brazilian friend yesterday, he was saying, God, if Zagallo spoke English, he would have given you guys so much entertainment. And that's one of the other things. Martyn, I don't know what do you think about what Rob's just brought up there?
Zagallo, I mean, although he won 2 World Cups as a player, he wasn't like the sort of superstar, not just Pele, but he wasn't close to being the superstar of the team. There are lots more sort of people who are more high profile. He would be like, so Germany's equivalent of the 1974 team, maybe like Uli Hoeneß or Wolfgang Overath. They were like, they were key parts of the team, but they weren't the star names. So I think that's probably one reason. And the other reason is sort of, European, South America. Obviously, from Europe, you're going to focus more on the European players. And I'm sure in South America, Zagallo got a lot more coverage than Beckenbauer did. The death of those.
Yeah, both. or maybe similar.
Yeah, so it's similar, but also Beckenbauer remained in the limelight a lot longer. Zagallo, I mean, he was manager of the Brazil team that won the 1970 World Cup 8 years after being a player. And Beckenbauer was a little bit longer. I think it was 16 years after being a player that he won it in 1990. But he then sort of remained very, very much in the centre of the public attention. sort of led the bid for the 2006 World Cup, then became a FIFA executive committee member. So he was always there, whereas I suppose Zagolla didn't go down that sort of administrative route. So he perhaps wasn't in people's consciousness, in this sort of modern era so much.
This brings us to another of those sort of media challenges, I suppose, certainly something that I encountered when someone has died and you have to then immediately report on them, which is how to bring up some of the issues, let's put it first, that Beckenbauer faced, because that post-playing career, his role in administration did lead to many investigations. Of course, delivering the 2006 World Cup for Germany, seen as the fairy tale summer, but we did have in the early 2000s even one of the British parliamentary select committees looking into wrongdoing by the bid. It went on for many years, and there were the subsequent investigations, and perhaps it might surprise people because there's been so much focus on, say, other World Cups like 2018 Russia, Qatar 2022, about how they won their bids, that the German bid has sparked a lot of investigations into the allegations of how the votes were won.
Glad you brought that up because, not to speak for Martyn there, I looked at his social media account and you got some stick I saw from people saying it was too soon to bring all of this stuff up. And it just isn't too soon. When you are writing an obituary when someone has died, it is in the moment. It is their life in the round, not just the good stuff. He was a big personality. Yes, a great player, a lot of achievements, charismatic man. But there were these kind of black spots, and not just the ones you just mentioned. They're related to World Cup bids and World Cup bidding. There were tax fraud inquiries and tax fraud convictions where he's had to pay back millions of dollars. There was this question marks around his private life and how he handled that and the impact of that. So when someone does pass, someone who is a very significant figure, you look at their life in the round. And I think most people who would do that fairly would have to address these things, Martyn.
Yeah, we did talk about it at the time, what we should do about it, because obviously I was very aware of the investigations and allegations against Beckenbauer. And so we decided we'd do it. So we'd do one. Somebody would write a big sort of piece around the sort of footballer and the manager issues, mainly around the World Cup bids. One was, it was Jens Weinrich, the German journalist, about, I think it was about 8 years ago, did a expose of the fact there had been a slush fund for the 2006 World Cup bid that Germany had to basically cash for votes. And then after Beckenbauer became a FIFA executive committee member, there was allegations that he firstly took money to vote for Russia for 2018, and there are also question marks over his relationship with the Qatari Mohammed bin Hammam around Qatar's bid for 2022. Now, FIFA did investigate this. The ethics investigation was launched, but Beckenbauer's lawyers blocked him giving any evidence on the grounds of ill health. And when the sort of time ran out, the statute of limitations ran out, there was a very interesting written ruling from the FIFA Ethics Commissions, basically questioning this sort of claim by his lawyers that he was too poorly to attend any hearings because he'd been doing other public activities, which, if he could do those, why could he not speak to the ethics committee? But anyway, it was timed out, and so by the time he died, there were these question marks against him, but no outcomes.
And the tone of that FIFA statement was pretty strident from the FIFA judges. The quotes were saying he did not appear to have any memory problems remembering matches of the 1990 World Cup, an event occurring 30 years ago in vivid detail, talking about the various trips he managed to make even during the pandemic and speeches and interviews he gave. So, this wasn't the media pointing this out. This was actually FIFA judges. I suppose it does create a challenge. We had the tributes from FIFA this week from Gianni Infantino. What do you do? How do you pay tribute to one of the greats of the game who featured in sort of all-time FIFA great squad list? But how do you overlook then the investigations that were hanging over him? It seems like the decision was just to completely overlook all that. And how much should a great footballing career negate any later life issues?
Yeah, it would have been perhaps even more interesting to see what they would have done had the Swiss criminal trial been able to be completed. That famously had to be suspended and collapsed towards the tail end of it, because there was a statute of limitation that passed during the trial process, which had the Swiss courts, and it wasn't just Beckenbauer and two or three other German officials. Had they been criminally convicted, there was a lot of evidence there, and Martyn talked about some of this just now. What would the tribute be there if someone has been found to have corrupted World Cup bids, etc.? But you have to kind of separate the great football player and the great football manager from some of these other things, right? There are layers to many people, I guess. It's not that simple.
There are, and you can also be somebody who's possibly done things which are wrong, and still be a sort of admirable figure in other ways, from on the pitch, and a charismatic guy. And I met Beckenbauer on several occasions, especially before the 2006 World Cup. When he did a lot of media then, and he was very engaging, very funny guy. So you can see why he's very popular.
And it's regional. Rob, do you think, I was looking beyond Beckenbauer, I was thinking about Sepp Blatter as well, who's obviously still with us. But I imagine his portrayal and how he'll be remembered might differ depending on what part of the world you're in. I'm thinking in Europe, it might not be the best kind of eulogy or memorial for Blatter when his time comes. But if you think about Africa, perhaps, and maybe even South America, maybe there'll be a completely different portrayal of the man, given what people in those regions think of what he's done, perhaps.
And it also does come down to what someone is being accused of. There are various levels of misdemeanors, let's put it like that, and away from football, in the music industry, when there's been musicians who've had various cases against them. Obviously, they're called not to hear their music again, but they are very far more grave cases, is what you might call sort of white collar issues, aren't they?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I was thinking, for example, Michel Platini is obviously but comparatively a much younger man, but he's had one sort of thing against him, which was this. Which he was banned for, which was this taking this payment from FIFA. But I imagine, hopefully nothing does happen to him in the next few years. But if it did, I think he wouldn't get a very positive portrayal compared to Beckenbauer, which perhaps he should, because in terms of his contribution to football, it's very, very similar.
Huge influence on the pitch. And with some closing thoughts on Beckenbauer, just looking back on past posts that I'd made on Twitter. I think we encountered him at a conference in 2014 in London. I certainly got to ask him then about the various allegations swirling around, and he said all the scandals and corruption suspected leads, their accusations, there is no evidence. But ending on another quote, he said there, "I was criticised, I had an arrogance in my behaviour until they understood it." Well, that is remembering Franz Beckenbauer and Mario Zagolla. Remember them as finally as the footballers who also won the World Cup as manager, something only 3 people have done, the third being Didier Deschamps with France, who's very much still with us. Moving away from that, it's actually spin-off from the Russian doping cases, Martyn, something that you've been looking into.
Yeah, I think we probably mentioned this a couple of years ago, but it's the former president of the International Biathlon Federation, Anders Bessenberg, a Norwegian, who has just gone on trial in Norway for corruption. And basically, the charges are he took bribes, including luxury watches, and had prostitutes paid for him by Russia. in return for covering up Russian doping cases. Biathlon is an endurance sport. It's had historically some fairly major challenges. And interestingly, the whistleblower Grigory Rodchenkov, who was the former head of the Russian anti-doping agency turned whistleblower, is going to give evidence against Bestenberg in the Norwegian courts, I think, but via video link from the USA. But this case, I think, was really, really interesting because it just showed that, going to the very top of some sports, how Russians' influence and behaviour was all part of this huge doping operation.
Yeah, it was a classic investigation there. It stemmed from Rodchenkov's evidence to the World Anti-Doping Agency and Gunther Junger, their chief investigator. He then supplied information to, I think, the Norwegian and the Austrian authorities. Norwegian because Besenberg is Norwegian, and Austrian because the biathlon union was based in Austria. And the details, Martyn, you kind of alluded to them. There was these, and it was years long. They were grooming this man and had groomed him. They had him in their pocket, and his deputy Nicole Resch. There was the famous line where he said, "Yeah, there were prostitutes. I'm not quite sure who paid for them, but they were definitely. Yep, that's true." There was these hunting trips, very elaborate hunting trips, in these alpine forests, as you said, watches, bags of money, and the Russians were so confident that they could get away with whatever they wanted, and it just makes you really think. If you nobble the guy at the top, and we've talked about leadership in these sports organisations and how powerful the presidents are. It's terrifying. There's no external oversight, so this case is really worth following.
There's another aspect to this which is mentioned in the trial, which may come out a bit, as the proceedings go on, which is interesting. In that the sports marketing agency, which is actually headed by Sepp Blatter's nephew Philippe Blatter, according to the claims in the court, they paid for Besenberg to have a BMW X5 car. They paid the lease for several years. They also had the marketing rights for biathlon. So that's another issue for them both perhaps in front after the case is concluded. If there's anything from that, they might have to explain what happened there. Very interesting, though.
Another issue that I've been reporting on this week is the fallout from a racism scandal in English cricket. Martyn, you've been on this too as well. It involves Yorkshire, the most successful county in the game. And this whole scandal stemmed from players revealing how they were racially abused for a long period. Azim Rafiq, there for two spells over a decade from 2008 to 2018, all resulted in cricket disciplinary hearings in England, led to Yorkshire being fined and also dock points in the system, and has raised so many bigger points also about how sports investigate cases, because it perhaps only got to this stage because certainly it felt that there was inadequate action by Yorkshire after Azim Rafiq first came forward about 3.5 years ago with this. The club first said there was nothing, there was no issues here, no one had to be found responsible. It then led to parliamentary investigations and it being looked into in further hearings because sort of no one took responsibility for what had been going on. But where we now find ourselves this week is the chairman who was there at the time, Colin Graves, from 2008 to 2015. He then went on to become the boss of English cricket, is now mounting a comeback to return to the county as chairman, despite only 7 months ago calling the racism perhaps just banter, dismissing it. And here he is 7 months on, about to regain control. So many strands to this that we've been looking into.
Yeah, so the basis is basically Yorkshire is probably 8 weeks away from going bust. It's run out of money. The sort of bad publicity has really affected its sort of sponsorship income, and they owe a huge amount of money, £15 million, basically to Colin Graves, the former chairman, who now wants to take it over. So they had hope. There was talk about Mike Ashley, the sport director, coming in. That interest disappeared. He never sort of ruled himself out, but from what I understand, he just didn't return any calls. There were suggestions that Indian Premier League franchises would come in. That evaporated. So it was basically they were left with the board there. Either we go bust or we sell up to Colin Graves, and looks like that's what's going to happen. It has to go to a vote of the members. And of course, there's been a furore because Graves he was in charge at the time. Azim Rafiq said a lot of this abuse of him happened. Graves has said he never was told about this at the time. He left in 2015. But it's a very tricky one for cricket, and he did put out a sort of very lengthy apology and apologised for the banter thing, which I suppose some people might think was just a sort of PR exercise, but at least he did it.
Yeah, well,
7 months after the original comments, and only in a statement accompanied by his bid to get control.
What's Azim Rafiq said, guys? The player.
Speaking to him, he thinks cricket's gone backwards. What has it actually learned from the whole series of hearings, the pain that he went through, having to recount everything at those hearings to sort of take on the system as well, because effectively he was, overlooked in terms of what he was trying to bring to light. There was not the action that he was hoping for, and here he is still sort of fighting and having to talk it up sort of 3.5 years after he sort of went public for the first time.
And how bad are the finances in cricket? Like you mentioned IPL, there are IPL teams. We've got IPL franchises, yes, much bigger competition, all that money washing into India, and the franchises there nearly $1 billion, around $1 billion. And what kind of numbers are we talking about? Yorkshire, what's the debt? How much are these teams worth, Mark?
The finance of county cricket are very sort of fragile at the moment. It'd be interesting to see what happens in the future, though. I think there is a sort of idea, and that the reason the IPL teams are interested in that it may be that the 100 in the future, at the moment it's all controlled centrally and the money's controlled centrally, that actually the clubs will be able to, they will control, they will have the income from that rather than centrally. So I think there is some interest. For example, the IPL side is looking at Hampshire. So I think there's going to be a lot of this in months to come. But at the moment, clubs such as Middlesex and Yorkshire are absolutely on the financially, they're in a very bad place.
It comes all from England, was where 2020 cricket, the new format, was invented, and it seems that India's worked out how to just do it better and commercialise it better.
Well, they also don't have football like dominating the sporting landscape in the way England has. In a way, when it's like they have almost monopoly in the way football has over English viewers. It's an incredible story, the rise of IPL. Those franchises, when it started, I think in 2008, guys, were sold for between $60 and $80 million. So we're saying in 15 years, those numbers are now $1 billion. It's an absolute boom and a real kind of hit with the audiences over there. In a way that, it doesn't matter how, it'd be hard. Whatever they try and do, you can't see cricket ever coming back in the way it was here in the UK when we were kids, say, terrestrial TV, millions of people watching, and big stars at county level as well.
And one of the big events for 2024 is the Men's T20 World Cup in the United States and the West Indies. So that is a moment when they're trying to see, can T20 cricket really break the United States as well?
Yeah, so that's interesting. India and Pakistan will be playing in the American side of the draw, or at least in the group stages there. That would be interesting. So
Long Island on June the 9th, the Nassau County International Cricket Stadium. Certainly a big name, big title for the stadium.
Big title. Hopefully for them and everyone, I anticipate as well, a big crowd. But what will be interesting is this for the diaspora, who are already, cricket fans, Indians, Pakistanis, Caribbean community that live in the US on the East Coast, certainly over there, as you mentioned, or will it bring new audiences who aren't familiar with the sport? That'll be interesting to see.
I suppose in part it might be how we see in the UK when it's NBA or NFL, that you get some of the diehard fans delighted that they can finally see it on British soil, whether NFL at Wembley or Tottenham when the NBA was here, they'd see it at the O2. But then you will get some of those newcomers just keen to see what it's all about, this intriguing thing of a World Cup, and cricket's here perhaps, but it will have that sort of novelty aspect, and it'll be the sort of quirks of it, and particularly maybe in some of the media coverage as well, it'll be like this, what's this weird thing?
Yeah, and also they've got the cricket at the Los Angeles Olympics, haven't you? So it's it's almost sort of building up towards that.
Yeah, that's one that's going to be watching through the year. We did, again, touch on it from last week's pod. Let's just return to it as well, because it's one of the themes of the year back in football. Financial fair play. We're waiting the outcome of Premier League cases, but also we've had an update on Premier League finances. The latest club to drop their annual report, Newcastle United, with so much intrigue about what they are able to do with the PAF ownership.
Yeah, so actually, Darren Eales, the chief executive, was very sort of, honest about the challenge they face. Because they've made losses of 75 million odd over the last season. He was saying the profit and sustainability rules are such that actually they're going to have to sell somebody, potentially even one of their sort of bigger names, in order to sort of comply with the rules and allow them to bring in more players. He sort of pointed out how, for example, Aston Villa sold Jack Grealish for a lot of money, then were able to spend that, and because you can amortize, spread the transfer the spend over several years, if you do get a big chunk of money in, then that's quite helpful. But he was saying it's the rules slow down their efforts to sort of break into the top of the big six, as it were, because they still, in terms of their income, they're still way behind the big six.
Yes, the 250 million odd in revenue for Newcastle. I think Darren Eales compared that to the 700 million or number that Manchester City announced. So that is some going. But these results come before Newcastle's Champions League income can be counted for this year. The new seller sponsorship, that world famous Saudi-based entertainment company that's now on their shirt fronts, and an Adidas shirt deal. But yeah, these are the rules that have got Everton in trouble as well. What do they call the profit and sustainability rules? And how do they work again?
You're allowed to lose up to £105 million over 3 years, but a lot of that, you can say how can they, if they've lost more than £70 million in one season, how can they comply? A lot of that can be written off. So spending on women's football, youth football, any capital development, that can all be written off. Various other things as well. So Newcastle, I think they're fairly confident that they won't be in trouble when we will find out next week if any Premier League team is going to be charged. And I think we spoke before that there's certainly Nottingham Forest are very worried that they will.
It has obviously led to various bits of coverage about Newcastle from some of the reporters who cover the club about the whole it's just protecting the cartel, and some of the arguments we heard about Manchester City in the past with them journalistically questioning why rules are in place that impede Newcastle's ability to invest and to try to catch up with the others, and how they're being artificially held back in that sense and not being able to enjoy the spending. Obviously, from a media perspective, some of those journalists who cover the club would benefit if they did have a greater ability to spend on players, which perhaps would boost their success and actually help the team become even more prominent.
Yeah, there's you spotted something in the accounts, didn't you, Tariq, about loans from Newcastle United?
Yeah. I can't take credit for that. All I can take credit for is reading. There was just buried in a couple of articles on these accounts, one on the BBC website and one on the Newcastle Chronicles, kind of way down, was this curious line about 2 loans to Amanda Staveley, that British businesswoman who helped broker the deal when Newcastle eventually was bought by PIF. She got a small share of the club as well with the Reuben brothers. And yeah, it was these loans for legal fees. And I was kind of racking my brains to thinking, why does the club need to loan this successful businesswoman two tranches of around 600,000. I don't know, but I do know that she has been embroiled in a couple of cases that I'm aware of, or we should be aware of, that have been published in the media. One was with Mike Ashley, the former owner of Newcastle, and I think it involved not doing him down or doing his ownership down, and this related to talking about the branding around St James's Park. And the other case is with a Greek shipping magnate called Victor Restis, who's interesting in a different way. I think he was on the board of Manchester City when it was owned by Thaksin Shinawatra, and Amanda Staveley helped Thaksin to sell Man City to these current overlords who've led them to all of this success. And Victor Restis was going to be, in another way, Amanda Staveley's character witness in her suit against Barclays a couple of years ago. In the end, he didn't show up. So quite a lot of intrigue there. I mean, there always is around Amanda Staveley. So, watch this space.
That Mike Ashley legal action was launched actually after Amanda Staveley spoke to us, I think, after a Premier League meeting. I think all 3 of us were there, weren't we?
Yes.
Yeah. And it was the comments she gave us, and which then landed her into legal trouble. So we had a small but unfortunate part to play in that.
Not through any attempt to catch her out. I think, if I remember it right, we were just trying to understand the detail and what it was with various questions. It was not gotcha questions.
No, absolutely.
Yeah, it was a chance to talk to at least a small owner of one of the most exciting developments in football. And to be fair to her, she gave us the time. Amanda Staveley is, at least then, was very keen to talk to the media for whatever reason, and that was very helpful. There was another line, if I remember right, about a possible purchase of Audrey Hepburn's estate. So I'm not sure what happened to that, but that would have been quite a high profile swoop by Staveley and co. at that taking place.
What a variety of subjects we do end up covering on here. Well, that about brings an end to this week's episode of Sport Unlocked. As ever, you can message us at Sport Unlocked on X, Facebook and Instagram. The messages drop into the inboxes. Also, sportunlockedpod@gmail.com. And if you hit subscribe, you land in your feeds automatically. Now, thank you for listening. Goodbye.